Mike Landon and Ed Friendly as well. And Ed Friendly wanted to stay true to the books, but that would have been impossible, as you could tell.
For years, Little House on the Prairie looked like the safest show on television. It was supposed to be a story about family, faith, and simple life on the frontier. Nothing about it felt dangerous, and nothing about it felt controversial. But behind the scenes, the real story was very different. There were arguments, uncomfortable moments, strange decisions, and scenes that even some of the cast later said went too far. One actress in particular has spoken about things that viewers were never meant to notice. And once you hear what was really happening during those years, the show will never look the same again. Why Little House on the Prairie ended the way it did. Little House on the Prairie is remembered as one of the most loved family shows ever made. It ran for years, had strong ratings, and built a loyal audience that kept watching even decades later. That is why the way it ended caught so many people off guard. When the series finally came to a close, the town of Walnut Grove was literally blown up on screen. For a show known for warmth, faith, and simple family stories, that ending felt unusually harsh. Fans could not help wondering why a series like this would choose to go out in such a destructive way. It turns out that the answer had more to do with what was happening behind the scenes than most viewers realized. The show itself began with much simpler intentions. NBC had decided to turn the books written by Laura Ingalls Wilder into a television project. Starting with a pilot movie written by Blanche Hanalis, the film introduced the Ingalls family and the world of Walnut Grove, and the response was strong enough that the network quickly ordered a full series. What started as a quiet adaptation of children's books soon turned into one of the biggest shows on television. But from the very beginning, there were disagreements about what the series was supposed to be, and those disagreements never really went away. Michael Landon was the most important person involved in the show. He had already been a major star from Bonanza, and NBC trusted him to carry the new series. Landon was cast as Charles Ingalls, but his role quickly grew beyond acting. He began writing episodes, directing them, and eventually producing the show. Over time, he became the main creative force, and most decisions about the story, the tone, and the direction of the series went through him. But that level of control created serious tensions behind the scenes. NBC executive Ed Friendly, who helped bring the project to television, wanted the show to stay very close to the original books. He believed the story should focus on simple pioneer life and historical accuracy. However, Landon wanted something different. He wanted the show to feel emotional and dramatic, so that it would work better for television audiences. In fact, he was willing to change details from the books if it made the story stronger on screen. The disagreement between the two men became so serious that Friendly eventually left the show. He later joked that the Ingalls family looked too comfortable on television compared to the real struggles of frontier life. After Friendly left, Landon had even more control, and the show continued in the style he preferred. As the seasons went on, the cast became very close, and many of them described the set as feeling like a real family. Melissa Gilbert, who played Laura, was only 8 years old when she was cast. She later said that Landon became a father figure to her, especially after her own father died. Melissa Sue Anderson played Mary, the older sister, and was known for being more serious and reserved. Karen Grassel played Caroline, the mother of the family. Around them were supporting actors who became just as important to the show, including Allison Arngrim as Nellie Olson and Jonathan Gilbert as Willie. Because the cast spent so many years together, the show developed a strong bond behind the scenes, and that closeness made the ending even harder when it finally came. For most of its run, Little House on the Prairie was very successful. It lasted 9 seasons and more than 200 episodes, and for many years it stayed near the top 20 shows on television. Even when the ratings started to drop in the later seasons, the series still had a loyal audience. That's why the cancellation surprised almost everyone involved. After the 9th season finished in 1983, the cast expected to hear what the network planned next. Instead, when NBC released the fall schedule, the show was simply missing. There was no big meeting with the cast, nor a personal call to Michael Landon. After spending nearly 2 decades working for NBC between Bonanza and Little House, the decision felt disrespectful to him. The series itself technically ended with the season 9 finale, but the story continued through a group of television movies. Landon decided to use those movies to give the show a proper ending, and that is where the most unusual part of the story happened. In the final movie, Little House, The Last Farewell, the town of Walnut Grove was destroyed. But that decision was not random. Landon did not want the sets to be reused after the show ended. He believed that if the town stayed standing, it might be used for something that did not match the spirit of the series. By writing a story where the buildings were blown up, he made sure the show ended on his terms. Filming the final movie was emotional for the cast. Melissa Gilbert later said, "It felt like a long goodbye that never seemed to end." The actors were saying farewell, not just to the show, but to a place where they had spent years working together. Many of the tears seen in the final scenes were real, because the cast knew the show was truly over. For safety reasons, the actors were not present when the buildings were actually destroyed. But when they returned and saw the set flattened, the moment was hard to take. Fans also noticed that one building was left standing. The small Ingalls house was not destroyed. According to the cast, that was done on purpose because the house was meant to represent hope, even after everything else was gone. The ending became one of the most talked about finales in television history. Some viewers were shocked by it, and others thought it was the only way the show could really end. But the unusual finale was not the only surprising part of the story, because behind the scenes, during the years the show was being filmed, there were moments the audience never saw, and some of them were far more uncomfortable than anything that happened on screen. The dark side of Walnut Grove. On television, Little House on the Prairie looked like the perfect world. Walnut Grove was quiet, kind, and safe. But in reality, the real set behind the cameras was very different from the world the audience saw every week. One of the things several cast members later spoke about was how common drinking was during filming. According to stories shared by Melissa Gilbert and others who worked on the show, alcohol was everywhere on set. Crew members sometimes went through several cases during a single day of filming. In fact, difficult filming days even had a nickname. They were called 3-case days, meaning that 3 cases of beer might be finished before the day ended. For the adult crew members, that kind of environment may not have seemed unusual for a television production in the 1970s. But the show also employed many children, and those young actors were growing up while watching adults drink throughout the workday. Years later, some of them admitted that when they were young, they simply assumed that kind of behavior was normal in the workplace. The example often came from the very top of the production. Michael Landon was not only the star of the show, he was also directing episodes and shaping nearly every creative decision. Several people who worked with him said he sometimes mixed alcohol into his coffee during filming days. Because Landon controlled the tone of the set, what he did often influenced everyone else. If he treated something as casual or harmless, the rest of the crew usually followed his lead. The environment became even more complicated when Landon's personal life began changing during the later seasons of the series. While he was still married to his wife Lynn Noe, he began a relationship with Cindy Clerico, a young stand-in who worked on the show. Clerico was 18 at the time, while Landon was in his 40s. The relationship eventually became widely known among the cast and crew, which made the atmosphere uncomfortable for some of the people working around them. For several of the younger actors, the situation was confusing. Melissa Sue Anderson later wrote about the moment she realized what was happening. She had been close to Landon's wife and felt hurt by the situation when the marriage began falling apart. In her memoir, she explained that many of the younger cast members had looked up to Landon as a mentor and role model. Seeing his personal life unfold so publicly on the same set where they worked changed the way some of them saw him. Over time, Anderson said the friendship she once had with Landon cooled. And as she grew older, she realized that the adult world surrounding the show was more complicated than she had understood as a child. Other cast members also described moments when Landon's behavior crossed professional boundaries. Karen Grassel, who played Caroline Ingalls, later explained that Landon sometimes shared very raw and personal topics during conversations on set. These discussions often happened in front of cast members who did not expect to hear them. Grassel admitted the conversations made her uncomfortable, especially because the show was built around family values and many young actors were present during filming. Then, there were the pranks. Landon was known for playing jokes on the cast and crew, and sometimes those pranks went much further than people expected. One of the most famous involved the twin babies who played Grace Ingalls. During a scene, Landon walked behind a set structure while holding one of the babies. Out of sight of the camera, a crew member quickly swapped the real baby with a doll. When Landon stepped back into view, he pretended to stumble and tossed the doll into the air as if he had dropped the child. The baby's mother believed for a moment that her child had actually been thrown. She screamed, and several people on set rushed forward in panic before realizing what had happened. Cast members later admitted that the moment was terrifying at the time, even though Landon treated it as a harmless joke. Another prank involved a script supervisor during the filming of a blizzard scene. The artificial snow made the pages of her script damp, and she was trying to dry them while standing near a heater. Landon quietly walked up behind her, pulled out a lighter, and set the edge of the script on fire. She screamed as the page burned, while Landon laughed at the reaction. Smaller pranks happened almost constantly. Some involved frogs being placed where people would find them unexpectedly. Others involved pretending to pick insects or lice out of someone's hair, just to get a reaction. The jokes were part of the culture on set, but not everyone found them funny. Sometimes the younger actors were also part of rough joking among themselves. When an 11-year-old Jason Bateman joined the show in the early 1980s, he quickly became the target of teasing by some of the older kids. In one incident, he was pinned to the ground while they knocked on his chest as if it were a door. Bateman later came up with a clever way to stop it. He asked a makeup artist to paint a large bruise on his chest and showed it to the parents of the kids who had been rough with him, which immediately ended the behavior. The physical demands of filming also took a toll on some actors. Alison Arngrim's famous Nellie Oleson hairstyle required a wig secured with bobby pins and a metal comb. During long days or active scenes, the pins sometimes pressed into her scalp hard enough to cut the skin. She later said that when she ran her hand through her hair after filming, she sometimes found small flecks of blood. Heat made filming even harder. On Arngrim's first day, temperatures rose above 100 degrees while she was wearing a heavy pioneer dress under bright studio lights. The heat was so intense that she eventually fainted and had to be revived by a medic before finishing the scene. Even the food used as props could be unpleasant. Outdoor sets often attracted insects and rodents, so some of the prop food was sprayed with chemicals to keep pests away. Actors sometimes had to handle that food during scenes and occasionally pretend to eat it, even though everyone knew it was not safe to actually consume. None of these moments were visible to viewers watching the show at home. On screen, Walnut Grove looked calm, kind, and gentle. However, behind the cameras, the set was a real workplace filled with pressure, long hours, adult behavior, and practical challenges that the audience never imagined. And the deeper the show went into its later seasons, the more tension began to appear between the very people who were supposed to feel like one big television family. The feuds and tensions audiences didn't see. On screen, the cast of Little House on the Prairie looked like one big family. The Ingalls sisters laughed together, the parents supported each other, and even the rivalries in Walnut Grove usually ended with a lesson learned. But behind the scenes, the relationships between the actors were not always that simple. As the years went on, personality differences, pressure from the show, and problems at home created tensions that the audience never saw. One of the most talked-about conflicts involved the two actresses who played the Ingalls sisters, Melissa Gilbert and Melissa Sue Anderson. Gilbert later said that from the very beginning, she felt that Anderson acted more serious and more controlled than the other kids on the set. She described her as someone who always wanted to do everything correctly and did not like fooling around between scenes. In one story Gilbert shared, she said Anderson once smacked her hand during a scene because she thought she was not doing the action the right way. Moments like that made Gilbert feel that Anderson was acting like the boss, even though they were both children. Other cast members noticed the distance too. Allison Arngrim, who played Nellie Olson, later said that Anderson often stayed apart from the younger kids and did not join them when they were joking around on set. Arngrim described her as having a prom queen-type personality, someone who seemed older than the rest of the group and not very interested in hanging out. For years, that became the story people believed. But much later, Anderson explained that the situation looked very different from her side. In interviews given decades after the show ended, she said she was not trying to act superior. She said she was extremely shy as a child and always worried about getting in trouble. While the other kids played between takes, she stayed focused on her lines because she did not want to make mistakes. She also explained that she was very aware of how public the show was, and she did not want her name connected to bad behavior. Instead of joining the chaos on set, she kept to herself, which made other people think she was cold. As the cast grew older, the distance between the two Melissas became more noticeable. Anderson was a few years older and treated the job more seriously, while Gilbert enjoyed the social side of filming. The difference in personality slowly turned into a quiet rivalry that lasted long after the show ended. The tension finally eased many years later. In recent reunions, the two actresses spoke openly about the past and said they had talked through their differences. Another conflict that stayed mostly hidden from viewers involved Michael Landon and Karen Grassel, who played Charles and Caroline Ingalls. On screen, they looked like the perfect couple, but their working relationship became strained early in the series. Before the second season, Grassel asked for a raise after the show became successful. According to her, the request did not go well. She later said that Landon argued her character was not as popular as others, and that her pay should stay closer to what the child actors were earning. After that disagreement, Grassel felt the atmosphere on set changed. She later claimed that her role in the stories became smaller, and that Landon sometimes ignored her during filming. She said there were times when he made comments that felt dismissive, and she believed his position as star and producer made it difficult for her to speak up. Grassel also said she felt that female actors on the show were not always treated the same as the men. She believed Landon had more patience with male cast members and was quicker to criticize the women. At the time, she kept working and did not talk publicly about the problem. But years later, she described the experience as feeling isolated and pressured. Even with those problems, the two eventually made peace before Landon's death. Grassel later said she was glad they had the chance to repair the relationship because the show had been an important part of both their lives. There was also quiet competition between the actresses who played Mary and Laura. Because the show focused on the Ingalls family, both characters were important, and each actress wanted to stand out. Anderson's performance as Mary earned the only Emmy nomination given to a cast member during the show's run, which made her role seem more serious in the eyes of some viewers. At the same time, Gilbert's character Laura became the emotional center of the series, especially in later seasons. As the show changed, the stories focused more on Laura's life, which shifted the balance between the two sisters. Neither actress has said the rivalry became openly hostile, but both have admitted that the pressure to do well created tension. They were young, working long hours, and constantly being compared to each other. Over time, they simply grew apart and stopped being close friends. Another issue that affected the atmosphere on set involved parents, especially the parents of the younger actors. Several cast members later talked about how difficult it could be when parents became too involved in their child's career. The situation that came up most often involved Melissa Sue Anderson's mother. Allison Arngrim later described her as extremely protective and very serious about her daughter's work. According to Arngrim, Anderson's mother watched everything closely and did not always let her daughter relax the way the other kids did. Because of that, Anderson spent less time joking around with the rest of the cast, which made the distance between them even bigger. Some of the younger actors felt that the strict supervision made it harder for Anderson to just be a kid on set. While others ran around between scenes, she often stayed with her mother, going over lines or waiting quietly. Over time, that difference helped create the reputation that she was unfriendly, even though the real situation may have been more complicated. Looking back, several cast members said the pressure on child actors during those years was much greater than viewers realized. They were working long hours, learning scripts, and trying to behave perfectly in front of adults who expected a lot from them. Small personality differences could turn into real conflicts because the environment was so intense. Yet, none of this showed on television. The audience saw a peaceful town, a loving family, and stories that usually ended with a lesson. Behind the scenes, the cast was dealing with real emotions, real disagreements, and the stress of growing up while millions of people watched them every week. And as surprising as those tensions were, they were not the only things the audience never knew about. Some of the most uncomfortable moments connected to the show were not arguments between actors, but certain scenes and storylines that pushed the limits of what viewers expected from a family series. The forbidden episodes fans couldn't handle. For most viewers, Little House on the Prairie is remembered as a gentle show about family, faith, and life on the frontier. But anyone who watched the series closely knows that some episodes went much further than expected. Over the years, the writers sometimes told stories that felt too dark, too strange, or too disturbing for a show that was supposed to be safe for families. Even cast members later admitted there were moments when the script surprised them. One example came during the third season. The story, called Bully Boys, introduced a group of troublemakers who arrived in Walnut Grove and immediately changed the tone of the show. Instead of the usual small disagreements between neighbors, the episode focused on real violence. One of the most surprising moments came when one of the brothers punched Mary Ingalls without warning. The scene felt harsher than anything viewers were used to seeing on the show. Allison Arngrim later said that when she first read the script, the story reminded her of a horror movie rather than a family drama. She described the atmosphere of the episode as tense from the beginning, with characters behaving in ways that felt more dangerous than anything the series had shown before. The episode went even further with a scene involving Caroline Ingalls. In the story, the same group of men restrains her and threatens her in a way that made many viewers uncomfortable. For a show built around family values, the situation felt shocking. Several actors later said the script pushed the limits of what they expected to film, and the finished episode left a strong reaction with the audience. Not every strange episode was violent. Some were simply confusing. One of the most talked about examples came during the final season, when the show was already starting to experiment with unusual ideas. In the episode For the Love of Blanche, Isaiah Edwards meets a traveler who asks him to care for his baby after he dies. The story sounds emotional at first, but the surprise comes when the baby turns out to be an orangutan. The episode follows Edwards as he tries to raise the animal as if it were a child. The story plays the situation seriously, even though the idea itself felt completely out of place compared to earlier seasons. Years later, cast members admitted they did not understand why the episode was written the way it was. The strangest part was that after all the effort spent on the story, the animal disappeared from the show and was never mentioned again. Moments like that made some fans feel the series had changed too much in its later years. The show that once focused on simple pioneer life was suddenly telling stories that felt unrealistic or forced, and viewers were not always sure what to think. But the episodes that people remember most are the ones that were not strange, but disturbing. One of the hardest stories for fans to watch came in the 7th season, in a 2-part episode often simply called Sylvia. The story followed a girl living with a strict and sometimes abusive father. Over the course of the episode, the situation becomes darker and darker, leading to a scene where she is attacked by a masked stranger in an abandoned barn. The attacker wears a clown mask, which made the moment even more frightening. Many viewers who watched the episode when it first aired later said the image stayed with them for years. The mask, the setting, and the sudden violence felt closer to a horror story than a family drama. The episode ends in tragedy when the girl falls while trying to escape and later dies from her injuries. For a show known for hopeful endings, the story was hard to watch. Even fans who loved the series admitted that this was one episode they often skipped when rewatching the show. Another storyline that left a strong impression on viewers involved the blind school. In the episode where the school catches fire, the scene becomes one of the most emotional in the entire series. Mary is forced to stand outside while the building burns, knowing that people she cares about are trapped inside. The fire leads to the deaths of Alice Garvey and a baby, making the episode one of the most painful moments the show ever filmed. Many fans later said the scene was difficult to watch, especially because the show usually avoided that level of tragedy. The sound of Mary screaming outside the burning building stayed in the memory of viewers long after the episode ended. Looking back, these episodes show a side of Little House on the Prairie that people do not always remember. The series was not only about simple lessons and happy endings. Sometimes the writers chose stories that were uncomfortable, frightening, or emotionally heavy. Those choices made the show more realistic, but they also surprised audiences who expected something gentler. And for some of the actors, the hardest moments were not even the scenes that aired on television. There were times when things happened during filming that never became part of the story at all, but the people who were there never forgot them. What's your favorite memory of Little House on the Prairie? Drop your answers in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click on the next video on your screen, like this video, and subscribe to our channel for more updates.